the Middle East is the real hotspot, I feel like. I mean, it's scary what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and we're escalating further and further, actually sending our missiles and our equipment into Russia. I don't like that at all, but it is true. The Middle East is the real hotspot. I just feel like a major war is going to break out very soon, and the US is going to be directly involved, and Russia's going to be more involved than people realize. I think a lot of people
Uh-huh.
don't realize Russia's strategic interests and its alliances it has in the Middle East. It has bases in Syria. It's Iran is part of BRICS. Russia is there in Iran right now, getting everything ready. I mean, I've been stressed myself just waiting for this Iranian retaliation. I just got to imagine how the people in Israel and Iran have to be feeling just waiting
Yeah.
for this thing. And I don't know. I feel like this is going to be the week. I feel like we're coming close to 3 weeks
Right.
since the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Some people are saying that, oh, Iran's blinking, they're not going to do it. I know Iran's going to retaliate. They have no choice. I think a lot of what they're doing right now is just making sure, sort of shoring up all of their alliances and people around the world, and giving them the justification, saying like, look, we have to retaliate. This is what Israel won't stop attacking us
Hmm.
and doing these types of things. This is within our rights, just to make sure everybody knows that this is going to happen, and to make sure that the world opinion is basically on Iran's side. And I think it
Hmm.
is. I mean, just if we just look at the Gaza conflict, 90% of the world is against Israel on this because of the genocide they're enacting. I mean, and
Right.
then Israel strikes an embassy building, a consulate building in Damascus, killing 12 people, 12 Iranians. That's never been done. Diplomacy, like
Yeah.
other than
Right.
when the U.S. struck the embassy in Serbia during the Kosovo wars. Uh, and then Ismail Haniyeh, I think people just wanted to say, oh, he's a terrorist. No, he's the political leader of Hamas. He is actually a moderate, was open to giving up 80% of the land to the Israelis just for a two-state solution. And he was the one that's in charge of negotiating a
Right.
ceasefire deal. And he was in Iran as a guest. This is like the he was in a place to stay that's the equivalent of what's, I forget what the White House is, but where foreign leaders and dignitaries stay that are guests of this country. It's such a slap in the face for all of
Yeah.
Iranians that this honored
Right.
guest that's here, that was to celebrate the inauguration of the president of Iran, gives a hug to the president of Iran, and then they kill him in this guest suite, for foreign leaders. It's a huge provocation, and it's like, look, if Israel wanted to kill Hania, they didn't have to do it in Tehran.
Hmm.
Hania doesn't stay in Tehran. He's in Qatar, other places. They did it specifically in Tehran because they're trying to provoke this war, and start this war. And so I think Iran is really sort of taking its time, making sure that everybody in the world is kind of on its side, and it is, I believe,
Hmm.
except for the United States, Israel, and just the Western
Yeah.
European countries. But
Right.
even the Western European countries are just kind of by name, but their populations aren't fully involved.
Yeah. The governments
Um,
are. I mean, they
so this
clearly
thing
are.
is right. The governments are, but I just don't. If this is the question, if the governments want war, but the people don't, it just can't happen, right? Because that's kind of the problem, I think, for the United States and NATO. You got these politicians, these hotheads that are like, yeah, we got to go in, go all out, but as far as I can tell, nobody in America really wants to do it, or maybe a few people, but most people aren't really excited or gung ho to go fight Iran. They don't understand. They might be like, "Oh yeah, I support Israel terrorists," but then when you really ask them, like, "Oh, you okay? Well, then go, strap up and and get over there." They're going to say
Hmm.
no. So I just don't understand when this war breaks out, because it is going to break out, and the U.S. is going to be involved. What can we really do if the people don't want to fight? The
Well,
people that
right.
do want to fight are the Arab countries that are being terrorized by Israel. Nobody wants to die for
Hmm.
Israel. I don't think, not many people here. They might say
Hmm.
until it really comes
Hmm.
down to it. I mean, what's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. That you don't have um, any. willingness to actually put boots on the ground, as they say, in the Middle East. I think that's just completely off the table. That's not going to happen. Our government's not going to even try that. I think what people think of when they think of a war with Iran, they think of the first Persian Gulf War. They think of the Iraq War, and these were, broadly speaking, quick and easy wars that involved very few American casualties, and in which we wreaked a lot of devastation from the air, and from our Navy. I mean, again, a lot of these, of course, aircraft were launched from aircraft carriers. I think that's the kind of war that people are thinking, quick and easy. We can watch it on TV, and we've got them outgunned. We've got the sophisticated weapons. We'll teach them a quick lesson. I, but I don't think if we really do become involved in a direct war with Iran, it's just not going to be that easy. Iran's not the pushover. Iraq was a very weakened country when we attacked it last. It had undergone very severe sanctions. Much of its population had starved. Um, and it was never the kind of power that Iran is now. Iran has had decades to develop. It's a much larger country with a much larger population. And they've had a long time to think about how to fight a war with Israel and with the United States. They understand that both these countries are superior to them in certain areas, but
Oh,
there are ways of dealing with that. Iran's had a long time to prepare for this, to think about it, to play to their own strengths. And what they've done is they've invested heavily in missile technology, and they've had real successes, and in drones. These are the new technologies, and the U.S. in the meantime is, they do have missiles and drones, but they've also held on to the old technology. I think the aircraft carriers, for example. And I think in the new world, the aircraft carrier is just a big sitting duck, and that's what we may find. Now, Hezbollah, who would also be involved in this war, also has a lot of rockets and missiles. And they've gone, like Hamas, they've gone underground. They've built, underground bases, long underground tunnels that they can drive vehicles down. And just as Hamas demonstrated in Gaza, Hamas is much, much weaker than Hezbollah. But because of their extensive system of tunnels, they've been impossible to defeat. The Israelis, outgunned them 100 to
okay, Dan,
1, but
I'm only
still.
getting about half of what you're saying,
Oh,
unfortunately.
oh, let's see, what can we do here?
It's
Okay, well, I was talking about uh, yeah, that again, Iran has had a long time to plan for this conflict. They understand what the strengths are of the U.S. and Israel, and rather than trying to meet them, strength for strength, they've gone for these new technologies, especially missile technologies and drones. And while the U.S. certainly has gone into these new technologies, they've also held on to the old ones. I think a lot of it is just a matter of prestige, like the aircraft carriers. Now, aircraft carriers are great for beating up on a third world country. They can't really defend itself. They were great when we attacked Iraq. Our aircraft could take off from them and bomb Iraq. They had no air defense. They had their Scud missiles, but they really weren't much worth anything. But now, in this new world, aircraft carriers are sitting ducks. They're big fat targets. And
mm,
I think we'll find that. So the U.S. has these aircraft carriers, then it has all these military bases. Again, I think this was really very foolish. It's really about controlling Iraq, but it actually makes the U.S. more vulnerable in the case of a war with Iran. Iran has already demonstrated that it can destroy these bases, um, with great precision. And then Hezbollah has done what Hamas did. They've built an extensive system of tunnels, and Hamas showed how effective that tunnel system was for them. Again, in fighting Israel, they were really they were and are outgunned by a factor of, let's say, 100 to 1, but they're still standing. And a good reason, or a big part of the reason that they're still standing is that they had that extensive system of tunnels. I mean, the Iranians can bomb them. They've dropped more bombs on them than apparently, the Allies dropped on Hiroshima, London, and Dresden combined during World War
You're
II.
talking
You know,
about
like,
Israel, not Iran. Israel
right.
on
I'm,
in Gaza. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Did I say
Yeah.
Iran? Forgive me if I did. Israel. We're talking about they've dropped more bombs. Measured in kilotonnage. So when you're talking explosive power, than the U.S. dropped on London, or not the U.S. didn't drop on London. Okay, I'm sorry, on Dresden and Hiroshima, and the third city I can't remember now. It's
Nagasaki.
escaping. Nagasaki, probably. I don't know. But anyway, just for no, no. Okay, well, anyway, it's just a huge amount of bombs, but Hamas is still standing because they've got this extensive system of tunnels, right? They can stay down there and they can survive these attacks. You can just, you can drop anything short of a nuclear weapon, and they're gonna survive and pop out and shoot at you again. Now, Hezbollah, which is much much stronger, a much more powerful military force than Hamas, they've done something very similar in southern Lebanon, and so yeah, they've also figured out, they've understood where again they can't meet fight the Israeli using this on Israel's battlefield, which would really be the sky, right? They don't have an air force that Israel has, but they can go underground, and then that, to a great extent, neutralizes the Israeli advantage. So I think if we
Mm.
find a war, I'm not going to say that Israel and the U.S. can't inflict a lot of damage on Hezbollah and on the Iranian armed forces, and certainly on the civilian infrastructures of both those countries. But it's clear that those armies can inflict a lot of damage on the U.S. and on Israel, and it may not be. So for that reason, I don't think that we're going to find the kind of war that a lot of Americans are expecting. They're used to those quick and easy television wars that we got. The first Persian Gulf War, the Iraq War. It's not going to be a replay of that. This is a different age, and Iran's a different kind of opponent. So is Hezbollah.
Yeah, I think Iran's goal was to establish deterrence. When that embassy, that consulate building was hit in Damascus, that's what their response was. They
Hmm.
telegraphed it and showed Israel that, look, we can hit you. Your Iron Dome is not impenetrable. Even with
Right.
the help of the US, UK, France, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, we can still get through with this tiny barrage and we can hit you. Deterrence should have been established at that stage, but clearly Israel is not deterred. They won and
Right.
escalated further with this assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. So now the calculation, I think, for Iran is, are they going to try to establish deterrence again, or do they believe that deterrence is not even possible and that this is just the beginning of an all-out war? Because when they strike, let's be honest, do you think it's going to deter Iran? I mean, deter Israel when they strike? I don't
Oh
think
no.
so. Israel is going to
No.
strike back, right? So is the
Right. Yeah.
deterrence game even over? It's so crazy. It's so suicidal for Israel. They just
Right.
show, and the United States. Iran showed like, hey, we're not messing around. We're not the third world country you think you are. Look,
Right.
we have hypersonic missiles. We have better missile technology than the United States and Israel. So what are you doing? We have shown you there's videos of evasive maneuvers of hypersonic missiles and ballistic missiles that are just evading Sidewinder or Iron Dome interceptors and striking targets in Israel. Apparently that didn't
Hmm.
work. So now it's just all out war coming. That's what Iran is preparing for, I believe. Do you think they're trying to establish deterrence again, or do they realize that, well, deterrence doesn't work for these guys? They don't
Yeah.
care.
I'm. They're going to try to establish deterrence, but I think they understand Israel well enough to know that there's a very good chance it won't work. I mean, this is. Um, they're
I mean,
probably
they
also
did
going
a
to hope. Right. I know. Well,
that
what can you do? That's the thing, is what can they do?
yeah,
That's
that
right.
that that, that first response was such a beauty in terms of establishing deterrence without going a full
Right.
out war. Very careful, calculated. We'll show our might.
Right.
Zero
Right.
civilian casualties. That
Right.
should have been it. Israel should have been like, okay, let's don't
Yeah.
do this
Yeah.
because Iran
Right.
can blow us up if we want to. But what
Yeah,
does Israel do? They just go around and they do the most sort of
yeah,
heinous,
right,
covert
right,
assassination of a state leader guest possible
right.
in the
Yeah,
capital of Iran. It just
right.
it's
Yeah, I
crazy.
think it right. I think you got it right. I was just thinking about that assassination. It's just hard to think of an equivalent. But let's say if we had some well-known European leader, who had led a lot of negotiations, and he came and he was a guest of the White House, and they put him up, maybe on the let's say at a nearby hotel or something like that, a place, a suite that is especially set aside for dignified for foreign dignitaries, and Iran struck the suite with a missile, killed this guy. Would we be actually still thinking about how we would respond? No, I think probably the next day there would be a fleet of bombers going over just to wipe out Iran. And then you
Mm,
think about without Soleimani, it's hard to even think of somebody who's equivalent because I mean Soleimani not only was he a top general, but he was a real hero. Let's say I think you'd have to go back to World War II and somebody like Douglas MacArthur or Eisenhower or something. What if one of those had been, our heroes had been assassinated? Would we have responded with the restraint that Iran showed? Certainly not. We
mm.
got to stop and think. You're just always like, oh, these crazy Iranians. No, these Iranians are very, very, very cautious. They've shown a tremendous restraint, but it's just obvious. Like we said earlier, after the first demonstration retaliation by Iran, we said that Netanyahu, he's not giving up. He wants war with Iran. He'll do something else, and he did it. He clearly that's what he wants. He wants war with Iran. That's what and he thinks he can pull it off this time. Clearly he thinks he can win. Not by himself. I think he understands well enough that Israel is just not strong enough to defeat Iran, but he thinks with the might of the United States, he can win. And he believes that, here's Mr. 58 standing ovations. He believes that he's got the U.S. behind him and that they will strike Iran hard if, um, once Iran retaliates.
Do you think we would? Do you think America would strike Iran? Would we do what Netanyahu wants us to do like that? That just seems so
Yeah,
crazy.
right. It does. It does. I think that we will. I mean, just part of it is there is this tremendous again, we're faced with elections and the whole Zionist issue is it's a big part of it. It's part of um, of course it affects the voting public, but it's also something that's very important to the donor class too. The top donors on both sides are just fervid Zionists. So it's just hard for us not to do this. And I think it's
Uh,
crazy. It shouldn't be that way, but that's where we are. This is the United States of today. Is actually just almost um, a servant to, maybe not quite a slave, but just an obedient servant of Israel.
how would we even strike Iran? Or would it be through aircraft carriers, submarines? I
Yeah,
mean,
well, I think it would be missiles, fired from various platforms. It could be submarines, but from naval vessels and from aircraft. And those aircraft
mm,
could be take off from bases in the region, but they also take off from aircraft carriers.
yeah, if I was in charge of of the military, it seems like boats aren't that great anymore because they're just floating on the top of the ocean and they can be targeted by these missiles and drones. Submarines seem to be, though, quite effective, though. Like,
Right,
well, how could you counter a submarine? I mean, it's way
right,
underneath the water. It's just like you're talking about with the Hamas tunnels. You're
right,
dropping more tonnage than Dresden and Hiroshima on Gaza, but they're still standing. Why? Because they're underground. I mean, the same thing with subs, they're underground. So,
right,
there's just
right.
a
Well, you
lot of
can
just sort
even,
of
right, right. You can even say, point to the same thing in Ukraine. It's just like when the Ukrainians are able to dig in, it really is hard to get them out, right? Yeah, okay, they're not way underground like Hezbollah, but if you can get trenches and pillboxes, bunkers, you can hang on for a lot longer. But these days, you get out in the open, and there's the sky is full of drones, and the drones either fire at you directly, or they see you, and a signal is sent back to a missile launcher, and yeah, within a matter of seconds or minutes, the target is taken out. So yeah, it's just best to stay underground or underwater if you can, right?
Right. Yeah, it actually makes a lot of common sense. And I feel like this is a problem with the RMIC is that we don't ever do any kind of cost benefit analysis with our
Yeah,
weaponry. It's just like you can spend what is it, $5 billion for an aircraft carrier or something like this. You know, I
easily,
don't know
yeah.
how much. Yeah, but
It,
it's clear
well,
that the where you're getting most bang for your buck for are drones, missiles,
right.
subs. These things seem to be very effective and are hard to take out. But we've gone
Yeah,
over this many times that we
right,
just kind of
right,
throw money, good money after
yeah,
bad. That's what we do.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
you don't do a cost benefit analysis. It's probably the cost benefit analysis is for the lobbyists, the congressmen, or whatever, and it's actually like the more money spent, the better. So
mm,
everybody loves the big expensive items. That just means lots of jobs and a lot of,
right. More
a
cost, more
lot of
benefit.
yeah.
That's what it is.
That's the exactly right. A lot of
See, it's a
pockets
more
get
cost, more
filled.
benefit
Yeah,
analysis.
yeah, but
Right.
like the things, the um, kind of the mundane, boring things like artillery shells and FPV drones. These are low profit, low cost items. Yeah, hey, nobody's interested in that kind of stuff. Not much benefit for the lobbyists there.
Yeah, it amazes me that the US military, Western military, doesn't seem to be able to think more than one move ahead. I mean, let's think about the Kursk incursion, for example. Okay, great. You get some brilliant PR for a week or 2 weeks. Did anybody think about what's going to happen next? Has anybody read a history book? What happens when you invade Russia? It never works out well for anybody. Just, Napoleon, Hitler, any scenario. It just doesn't work out. What's your idea?
Yeah,
Like you captured
right,
some useless villages in the middle of some wilderness. You
right.
captured a lot of woodland. What military benefit or strategy this has? Everybody, hurrah, hurrah,
Mm,
we did it. We got some Russian land. For now,
yeah,
they're all dead men
right.
now. Good job.
Yeah,
And
right,
it's absurd. And then the same
right.
thing here with we were just talking about the Israel-Iran situation. You think that the US is probably going to strike Iran. Did anybody think about what's going to happen next? What about our
Mhm.
50 military bases in the Middle East? They don't have
Yeah,
any air defense. They don't
right.
have any ability to
Yeah,
defend against what Israel does. Our aircraft carriers that we're sending there. Anybody think about what happens after our planes take off and try to strike Iran? I mean, or even calculated the fact that there are now S-400 air defense missile systems now in Iran, and they have electronic warfare systems. It doesn't seem like it. I feel like we're a 3 year old, just pushing that little blocks on a wire going back and forth without any being able to think about what's going to happen next or be able to, that was a bad analogy, doesn't matter, but you
okay.
you you know what I'm talking about.
Sure, sure.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, well, I think you're describing our political leadership fairly. I mean, I don't think they understand. They don't really understand that there are limits to Western power, and they don't know really anything about the physical reality of military conflict. For them, it's all a matter of rhetoric and will and photo ops and this is how these people think. Now, I think when you get into the militaries within the IDF, within the Pentagon, they actually there are people who do understand it pretty well, but they often just get pushed aside. It's the people that tend to rise to the top are the ones who tell the politicians what they want to hear. um, it's clear there has been a reluctance on the part of the Pentagon to get involved in a war with Iran, because I think a lot of them do understand that this would not be a cakewalk. It's not like it's not going to be a repeat of the Iraq War. They do understand that, and I'm sure that some of them have tried to tell the administration, and perhaps they got them through in the past. But there's always the hotheads, both well, especially in the State Department, but within the Pentagon too, and maybe in the Pentagon, it's not so much the hotheads, but just the career ladder climbers, just the bootleggers, the ones who just know, who got to where they were because they always said what the politicians wanted to hear. And and if there is some sort of battle taking place within the Pentagon, it's between the bootlickers and the realists. And let's just,
Yeah, well, if they're bootlickers, that means they're basically they're politicians themselves, and I think that's what
yeah.
Lloyd Austin is. Lloyd Austin is more of a politician than he is a real military general, and I think that was clear when Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated. Instead of condemning it, he comes out straight and says, "We will defend Israel." Basically, just saying that it was perfectly fine what Israel did, and we got their back, and we'll go to war with them.
Mhm.
We'll go to war. We'll stand alongside Israel as they drag us into World War III. I mean, he's that's not a calculation made by a true somebody that's a military strategist. That's a calculation made by a politician. So the
Yeah.
Pentagon is run by politicians. So I think so. Now we're just going to walk into this war. At
I
least
think
I
there's a
think
very,
so.
yeah, I think there's a very, very good chance of it. It's not a certainty. Nothing's a certainty, but there's a high probability that we will.
Yeah, it's just I'm just afraid when that first base in the Middle East gets wiped out and we have American casualties start to mount up, the war machine here in the United States is going to go crazy, and they're going to do everything they can to drum people up to say like we're under attack instead of
Hmm.
realizing that we are the ones that are attacking, and it's we're doing it for Israel, that we're sending our sons and daughters to die for Israel, not for the United States. I'm afraid that messaging, that the truth will get buried. The
Oh
first
yeah,
casualty of war
right.
is always
It'll
the
be very,
truth.
very quickly. Right. No question about it.
Well, hopefully there will be enough pushback here in the United States, enough people questioning it. I think social media does help. I think there is a global consensus that what Israel is doing is wrong. There are more and more people really coming out and speaking out against Israel. It's very encouraging. For example, I don't know if you know much about Candace Owens. Like she has
Mhm.
been really coming out strong, and I think is helping that conservative base as well that
Right.
is traditionally very pro-Israel,
Right.
to kind of realize that, hey, these are not the allies of Christians or Christianity. This
Right.
is
Right.
this is not what we're doing. And she's becoming she converted to Catholicism. She's quite religious now. So I'm seeing some hopeful trends. And these people have a lot of reach, and I think more power than people realize. I know
Yeah.
mainstream media,
Or
the
yeah.
real power,
Right.
Tucker
Tucker
Carlson, of
Carlson.
course.
Right. Right.
Right, yeah, great. But I think the problem with the real power of mainstream media is sort of this academic laundering of the truth, because once it's under the New York Times or the Washington Post, if you do a
Hmm.
Google search, if somebody gets in an argument with you online, it's like, well, I'll prove it to you, I'll Google it to you. Well, these are the authoritative sources and they say
Right.
it is,
Right.
and it's like, what is this? I haven't heard of the gray zone. That's not a real thing. That's the
Right.
propaganda. That's the
Right. Right.
problem, is that everybody just
Yeah.
assumes that this makes it legitimate. And of course, all these search engines, in terms of
Yeah.
SEO, this is what gives it credibility, are
Right.
these
Yeah.
old established
Right.
propaganda
Right.
websites that they're
Right.
not news anymore.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know.
Still, I think it's still a majority of people tend to rely on yeah the establishment media, and I think that's especially true among the elite. The political elite, the cultural elite, the academic elite. You would think that the academic elite would produce a lot of people, who question and move beyond the establishment, but unfortunately, it's not true in this country. They really are servants of the establishment. That they help to buttress the establishment. They like to pretend they're revolutionaries, but that's the whole game that everybody plays. Everybody's sort of a revolutionary, but they all think the same thing, right? And it's the way
Mm.
the establishment thinks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the more shocking things to realize that there is a real monopoly on information. You think that there would be a strong incentive for at least one newspaper, one mainstream establishment
Hmm.
newspaper, to break away and tell the truth, because it would resonate. Because once
Yeah.
the truth is laid out in plain English for everybody to see, it resonates with everybody. Like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. we're constantly being confused and our minds are being contorted by all these strange stories and narratives that are trying to convince us one thing that doesn't fully make sense, but they do it. They use enough fancy language that you're like, I guess that's true. It is the Wall Street Journal. I guess that's got
Yeah.
to be right. Um,
Yeah.
but
And when
but
you're
why?
as and the thing to remember is that most people are embedded in institutions, meaning that you work at a university, right? You teach at a university and the faculty, and if everybody's thinking one, it's really very hard to break away. You can find the gray zone, for example, but then if you bring it up among your colleagues, you're going to be laughed at, or you're going to be, and potentially you're going to be ostracized. It means it really does happen. Um, it does happen. Yeah, and it's it's not just academia, but it's the media in general. They actually tend to be very very conformist, and when you're within that crowd, it's easy to get home and read secretly these things and find out. But when you get there among those people, you realize that if you say the wrong thing, all those heads are going to turn, and then you're going to be the black sheep in the flock, and nobody
Right.
wants to be the black sheep.
Yeah, and the problem is also that once you're vindicated because you're saying like, "Hey, this story you're saying doesn't seem to be true. This is the truth,"
Yeah.
and then you get ostracized, you're the black sheep, and then you become vindicated when it's true. But nothing happens. They just go
Right.
on telling the
Yeah.
next lie, and
Yeah.
everybody just
Right.
forgets that. Like, hey, you lied about everything for the past
Yeah.
5 years.
Right.
Why am I still believing you? I mean,
Right.
credibility is eroding slowly, but it just
Yeah.
amazes me
Right.
how long it takes. Like, how many times can you be lied to and still kind of just be like, oh, well, it's true, it's true. And it's just the power of language, I feel, of
Yeah. Oh,
just
yeah.
the.
No, it's I find it too, of course, because I go to a lot of different alternative news sources. I'm aware of what's going on. But if you sit down and you just start reading articles or watching, different news shows, whether it's MSNBC or it's Fox News. You find yourself entering a new reality, and everybody talks like, oh, we all know this. Like it's just, these incidents, whatever, maybe know that that incident never occurred, but for them it's real, and they talk about it as real. And then if you went and said, oh, no, no, that actually never happened, or everybody would like, it's this guy. We all know and it's just people together constantly repeating things, again, we call it a narrative, right? The narrative gets established. The narrative has real power. It creates a reality, and that seems more real than reality sometimes. And you try to stand against it, and you're just, you instantly appear as a fool, somebody who doesn't get it. Get him out of here. Like Jeffrey
Mhm.
Sachs. I mean, again, we have a lot of people that we go to, people like Jeffrey Sachs, right? He used to be on all these mainstream news shows. They
Right.
all went to him. He was a world-renowned expert, somebody who'd worked together with prime ministers and presidents, and
Yeah.
has a hotline to the White House. And well,
No, he wrote
eh,
like
at,
half of my econ textbooks in college.
right,
Like that's
right,
where I know Jeffrey Sachs from, is from school,
right,
from college. I had to
right,
read about him.
yeah, right. So I'd heard about him years and years ago, but but then it was, uh, I think it was actually Bloomberg News. He was being interviewed, and about um, the pipeline, the Nord Stream and the explosion. He said, well, clearly, he didn't have any doubt that the U.S. did it, and they just kind of their jaws dropped and looked at him like, what's this guy talking about? That was the last time he ever showed up in mainstream news. They said, get this guy out of here. He doesn't get it. This is not what you're supposed to say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's wild.
it's very powerful, and it's again, you can find alternative news sources, but people live in those worlds. They live within those narratives. They are within these institutions, and it's not easy for people to break away, even if they have the means. Like it's just a few mouse clicks away, and you can find the information. You people have friends and colleagues, and they're just tied into this reality. It's just not, it takes a lot of guts, a real courage, and a determination to break away and find your own way. Uh,
Mhm.
fortunately, there are brave souls that have done that, and we know who they are.
Right. Okay, I'll ask you one last question. How important do you think this election here is in the United States in terms of ending these conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine and Russia? I mean, Do you think it really even matters at all? Like, is it just
It potentially matters, especially Trump is a wild card. I've heard him referred to as a chaos agent. You just don't know what he's going to do. But and there is a chance. I have to admit it. I'm very cynical. I expect that nothing, if he's elected, nothing will really change. Even though he said a lot of good things about Ukraine, um, but I expect that nothing really will change. Um, and then for Kamala Harris, I'm sure nothing will change. I just I I'm almost positive nothing will change. It'll be the same kind of people. I mean, I think that's just going to be default Democrat establishment people. That's what it's going to be. And we won't get Tony Blinken himself, but we'll just get Tony Blinken, version 2.0. And that'll be true for everything else. I don't think we're going to see any serious change. There's some hope that something will happen on the Palestinian front. But when, again, I haven't seen any evidence that she's occasionally used some rhetoric that's shown some sympathy, but so has Biden. When I think we're talking about the realities that people are embedded. She's just too much a part of the Democratic Party establishment, and
yeah,
she's not. Let's be honest, she's not a very smart person. If you had somebody who was very smart and had a real backbone, maybe somebody like that could break away. I don't think she could break away, even if she wanted to. And I mean, with
yeah.
Trump, I think sometimes his instincts are good. He says the right thing, but I don't think he really, again, at least from what I've seen of him, especially in his first term, that he doesn't really have the intellectual discipline, the moral character to really break away from it. I think we're going to see more of the same, regardless of who is elected.
Okay, well, thanks for the dose of positivity. Yeah, it's true. It makes me sick when I see Trump. They're all trying to out Zionist each other. Except
Yeah,
Kamala actually seems to be kind of just not touching the subject as much, I think, to appeal to her base,
yeah,
which makes me
right.
slightly more
Yeah, they have to be
sympathetic to her.
careful. Same thing with with Biden. Biden was doing the same. They occasionally make sort of gestures
Right. But
and
but
say this
then
is a problem, but they're not.
right.
But they
Right. This is
Biden
the
has never
Biden
done
Harris
anything.
administration. Or this is the Biden Harris administration. They just approved another $20 billion of
$20
say
billion.
arms sales,
Right,
20
right,
billion to Israel to continue the genocide. So it's like, are you
right.
really against this? And then why are you
No, they're
not
not.
saying something about this?
They're
You
not
know,
against it.
and also when they say that it approved a sale, is it really Israel that's paying it, or is it really just the American taxpayer that's footing this bill?
Well, yeah.
I mean, the
I
money's
think, I mean,
coming. We just
right. Well, we give it Israel outright give them at least what 3.5 billion a year. So we've been doing that forever. But there's other things. There are all kinds of breaks and whatever. I don't know what the real total
I,
is,
I
but
would
we're
like to
always just
see.
giving things to Israel.
Right. I would like to see that transaction. Is Israel actually paying us? Where are they getting that money from? Because I
Yeah.
guarantee you it's not Israel that's paying for it. It's the US taxpayer that's paying for it.
Yeah,
I'm almost
always
certain.
is. Right.
And they said, "Oh, we approved $20 billion sale." Like, really? Well, you gave Israel $20 billion and then they gave it to us and that was the sale. Um
Yeah, I wouldn't be
anyways,
surprised.
right. Yeah, this election I'm just I don't know. It's just not exciting. We talk about democracy and the importance of it, and it just doesn't feel like we have a real democracy here at all. We talk about all these evil countries like Iran and Russia, and I see what's happening there. It's like, hey, it looks like they got a lot better, vibrant democracy in Iran than they do here in the United States. Um, it's a we're in a topsy turvy world. Okay, Dad. Well, I guess maybe that's a good place to end it.
Okay.
We'll stop it there.
All right.
Okay. Have a good day.